Let's be.
Yeah, we'll just go with the flow.
Yeah, I mean, it's no, and we should be live. Yeah, I think we are live. Okay, great. I am here live with, and correct me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Andreas Widmer or Widmer. Would that be okay?
Widmer is good. Widmer is good.
Okay, wonderful. Let me get I had feedback there. Okay, there we go. Wonderful. Okay, so we are live. It is a blessing to be here with you, Andreas Widmer. For people that might not know, you were the Pope's guard for how many years?
2 years. I'm not the only one.
Not, yeah, of course, not the only one, but you were his guard. You knew him well. You dialogued with him. It's an incredible blessing. And I imagine it must have affected your life in such a positive manner as well.
It has. It's the pivot point of my life. I would have never found Christ without my interaction with John Paul II. And yeah, it's been, my whole life has been shaped through my experience, and the pivot point, meeting John Paul, my life before, my life after. I'm very grateful to him.
You wrote a really, really good book that I recommend people get a hold of, called The Pope and the CEO, I believe is the title. You're all working on another book, which we can talk about later as well, but incredible book there. I recommend anybody get a hold of a copy of that book. They can find it on Amazon. Do you have a webpage? Maybe people can find that on as well?
Yeah, actually, I don't have a webpage on it yet. It's
okay.
So I'm so busy on writing the book that I had very little time to prepare it. But it's only coming out. The new book is coming out in April, so there will be a website then. But my platform is the Catholic University of America. I'm a professor there, and I teach entrepreneurship. I'm no academic. I'm no doctor or anything. I'm an entrepreneur. After leaving the Swiss Guards and coming to America, I was very blessed with a career in entrepreneurship in software, in the high-tech space. And but I sort of retired from that and really focus on education now. And so you can find me and about me at the Catholic University of America website. And I run a center there called the Sioka Center for Principled Entrepreneurship. So entrepreneurship, Catholic University, if you Google that, you'll find me.
And the Catholic University of America is top notch. It's one of the top in the world. So you are being very humble, my friend. You're being very, very humble there. The Catholic University of America is just magnificent.
Now, time out. They're top notch on theology and philosophy. I'm teaching business, and we're a very new school. And the thing is, I hope I'm top notch for the students who are in front of me. No question.
Amen. Now, let me ask you this. You said something really, really incredible. The point that you made was, had it not been for the incredible Pope St. John Paul II, you probably would not have found Christ the way you have now. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit? That to me is really fascinating.
You see, he's a model of evangelization. You know how he talks about the new evangelization. And so I'll take a little bit of time to explain this story to you. If you don't mind, it'll take 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Definitely. No, without a doubt, the floor is yours.
So I was I'm 6'9". I'm a big guy. Okay.
Wow.
And I sucked at school. I'm from Switzerland, from a small village. And I'm the youngest of 6 kids. I have 4 older brothers. I really struggled growing up to like measure up and finding what I'm good at. You know, when I grew up, they didn't know anything about learning disabilities and stuff like ADHD and dyslexia, which is all stuff I know now. So,
yeah.
But anyway, but in a sense, God blessed me with this. So I stayed very humble and very sort of, I couldn't find my way. I could not figure out what I would be good at. Eventually, because of my size and having 4 older brothers to fight with all the time physically, I excelled at one thing, and that was the military. In Switzerland, there's a militia. Everybody goes to the military, and they start to track you at like 12 years old. And it's the only thing I had that I ever excelled at. And so when I get more involved in this and I had to go to the military, and I was invited to stay and become an officer. When somebody told me, hey, I'm a bodyguard. Yeah. And I'm like, that, my friend, is the coolest thing ever, especially if you have a bug in the ear and the gun down here. I'm like, I sign up, whatever this is. And they're like, okay, I gotta call these people, that was in the early 80s. you gotta send a letter to these people and so on. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And I sent them the letter. And only afterwards, imagine my focus and my priorities, only afterwards did I find out, or did I not find out, but realize that this is protecting the Pope. And I'm like, sure, I'll protect the Pope. I have no problem with that. Meaning it's not that I have no concept. I'm a cradle Catholic, but I was catechized in the 70s. I knew more about ghost stories and Buddha than I knew about Jesus Christ and his vicar on earth. It was just not, but I was aware of him a little bit, but I had no idea. Yeah. And I don't want to be unfair to people who catechize me either. I was hard of learning. Anyway, a long story short, I get accepted. I apply there because of my credentials as a good in the military. They accept me. If I would have known how hard it was to get in, I would have never applied. So I get in, and right away, and I'm like, feel like the boss. I go there saying this, finally something I could be good at. And very early on, so you go through this recruit school, which is tough on many levels. But they put this test in front of you and say, oh, you think you're such a tough guy? You pass the test, you're done with the recruit school. You can take it today. And this is sort of how they measure up. And it has to be competitive. I crushed that exam a week early. Yep, that's me. So, and that was like, it's not unheard of, but 2 years before me, nobody did that. And I'm like, okay, now I'm the boss. And so and then the next day, I basically leave and they're like, okay, you're free. Your duty starts on January 1st. This was December 23rd. You're off until then. Great. First thing I do is sleep until 11 in the morning. I'm 20 years old. So then I get up and I try to go downstairs, and I run into the sergeant major. And he's like, you come here. There's a guy sick. You're working. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I don't work for you yet. He almost ripped my head off, which one of the good things in the Swiss Guards, they're all my size, not quite my size, but this guy was a machine of a man.
Wow.
The only time I ever fought with him is for the first 3 minutes of meeting him there. But before that, I never met the guy. Anyway, he rips my head off, cuts me to size, and says, you're going to work from tonight at 8 o'clock to tomorrow at 8 o'clock. So all night. That was the 24th. Can you imagine that this was there was a party at the Swiss Guards that night, Christmas party and everything, and I had all these plans, and this guy puts me to work. And so that day, I'm like having my, a perfect emotional storm, I call it. It was sort of a crash. I called home, which the commander actually gives us twice a year. He gave us the right to call home. There was one telephone, 130 guards, at my time, 110 guards, one telephone, and you can only call in, not out. And wow. Anyway, so I called my parents, and I think the trigger for me was, since I called home, and I'm the youngest of 6, and my mom is like on the phone, and when she heard that I had to work, she started to cry. That's a trigger. It doesn't matter how old and what size I am.
Of course.
She cries, I cry.
Yeah.
But I couldn't do this, with all the guards around and everything. But I went to work, and this is all stuff when I was so oblivious. So I went to work. The Pope is protected in circles. Some circles, they stay where his apartment is. Others move with him if he moves. I was in the staying circle, and smack in the middle. He has a little apartment in the Apostolic Palace, and there's a little room in front of it which has a Swiss Guard in it. And I reported to duty there, and I passed all of these other people, which I was new. I mean, they knew who I was by then, but I was new, and I had to sort of introduce myself and go through. The guy who was there before me couldn't wait to say, like, I'm going to go party right now, Christmas and everything. And boom, the door closes, absolute silence. I'm in that room. You lock yourself into that room. Then I was alone, and I absolutely lost it. I accused myself and I said, you're a total idiot. Like now it's coming all up because this is all the armor that you put on and make yourself like a big guy. I was in there reduced to tears, like, but everything fell off me. Everything was only a pretense, pretending. And I cried for like 2 or 3 hours, like sobbing.
Wow.
Because I felt like I failed in life. These people, I come here, I think I'm somebody here. I'm nobody here either. This, like my life is over. It's, you have to think into the 20-year-old. And then the radio goes off and the commander says, Widmer, the Pope is going to leave. Let him out. And I'm like, what? And he says, now move it. Right? Because he knows, we always know where he is, even in his apartment. We know where he moves. And then the doors, if you ever meet him, don't tell him. The doors are locked unless he approaches the door, and then it's miraculously open because we open it right before he gets there.
Yeah.
But so all I could do is unlock the door, step back, and stand in attention, and the door opens and John Paul comes in. And he stood in the doorway, and this beautiful light behind him came through into my dark little room. And he had this thing, he's a stocky, good-sized man. And when he was interested in something, he would like sort of tilt his head, and he pointed at me and says, hey, you're new, I've never seen you before. And I'm like just standing there, like I'm still like in another world. And this was all just too much for me. I think I don't know, I gave him my social security number as my name or something. I just didn't know what to say. I'm standing there in attention, and he of course comes right through and reaches out his hand. And this, if he talks to us, we can talk to him. So, and I of course take my hand down and I gave him my hand, and as our hands meet, he raises his head and our eyes meet. And I knew immediately, like I must have looked terrible. So, with these raccoon eyes, crying and everything. And I could see he noticed right away. And he just looked at me and he says, of course, this must be your first Christmas away from home, isn't it? That was the wrong thing to say to me. I dissolved. So I started to cry and tears came down as I'm holding the Pope. This is me meeting the Pope. And by the way, I'm his bodyguard. So I'm starting to weep holding his hand. He comes in, he sort of holds me around with one hand. Our hands were still shaking. And he comes around and holds me around. And he says, Andreas, I'm so happy you're here. Everything is going to be good. I'm happy that you come here to work with me. And I welcome you. And I'm telling you, everything is going to be good. I will go celebrate Mass right now, and I will say it for you.
Wow.
And then he left. And I'm like, okay, that's a good guy. Now, you see, and this was this pivotal moment, both from the grace that I received from that Mass, from his prayer, from all that, but also the experience of, see, the way this happened in my conversion in that sense, although it's not a conversion, it's a deepening or an actual realization of it, is that from that day on, I admired this guy. He was the good guy, Sergeant was the bad guy. And I just like, anytime I saw him, he's like, hey, Andres, how are you doing today? Come on, we're going to do this. And this, and he impressed me, this wannabe tough guy at 20 years old. Both with his physicality and with and having the circus there and laughing and having, and always never passing me without somehow signaling to me saying, well, I got your back. I started to admire him. And when he noticed, and then he introduced me also to the rosary, to pray, and he'd say, pray. And when he noticed that I admired him, he stopped and he says, it is not I who you want, it's who I have. What you're admiring in me, you can have it, because it's Jesus. What you're seeing here and what you're experiencing is not John Paul, it's Jesus Christ. Wow. And so he was like a wayside to the cross, that as soon as you wanted to give him the accolades, he's like, no, this is where they go. That's what you. So he was a pathway for me, literally, to Christ. And so then he started to teach me, and there was also a couple of critical people around him who helped me start to pray. And and that prayer, just with their guidance, led to some very profound spiritual experiences that I had there with him while I was there, and it made me found Christ. And that's sort of why I'm saying that he's so pivotal. Of course, once you find Christ, then it's still one step forward, two steps back, and I'm a work in progress my entire life.
We all are.
He put me on that path. And there's so many people today that they suck up all the accolades, and there's nothing left for Christ. You know what? We're supposed to be waste signs. And what I so admired about John Paul, and which is so needed in our world today, is the evangelization through people, in a sense, falling in love with you because of the authenticity. I like to say he was the most human person I've ever met in my life, and it was so attractive. And in this attraction, he ends up pointing to where this is actually coming from. That's true evangelization.
Without a doubt, that are really fantastic points you make there. It really is true. You really should lead people closer to Christ. And I know one thing about the incredible Pope St. John Paul II was he had a magnificent devotion to our Holy Mother Mary. I imagine I'm looking at back there. I see you have beautiful images, beautiful icons back there. I can really tell that he had an incredibly positive influence on your life. Now, when it comes to Holy Mother Mary, I imagine you talk about really not being within the faith. And I've got to be very clear. A lot of people, it's fair to say a lot of people were poorly catechized in the past. The church is doing a really, really good job now. They're really incredible places like the Catholic University of America and many other locations. But in terms of also helping drive you closer to Mother Mary, which in turn drives you closer to her son, did that have any kind of influence on you as well? Being closer to Pope St. John Paul II, and as you talked about, beginning to pray the Rosary, how did that affect your life?
So, of course, he's the Marian Pope, and he, when he taught me how to pray, he gave me the Rosary, and he said, "This is my favorite prayer," and it is through Mary to Christ. Yeah. And I have to say that my experiences with this prayer, which I recommend very much, the Rosary, this cadence of the Rosary and this meditation, it's like the sea. You know, the Rosary is so beautiful. Is that it's like the sea coming over you. It's like when you're at the beach, the waves, the cadence of the Rosary. That's what happened to me. That these waves, and eventually these waves come over you, and they engulf you in a loving, beautiful way that give you that just gave me the presence of God. I mean, the presence of God is there anyway, but it gave me the awareness of it, that I had very deep experiences praying the Rosary through the tutelage of sort of all the people around him and his guidance of prayer. And I recommend it to my students and to anybody at any time of age. But the beauty is, if you start a little early, it actually becomes, just like all the virtues, the quicker something becomes a habit, the more beautiful the habit can become over time. And so you want to give it a long time to mature. No, it becomes nicer as you go along. And so I recommend this very much to young people, to say, and I had all the prejudice, like my grandma prays the Rosary, I'm not going to be seen. And they were like telling me, look, what are you doing all day? You're just standing around, basically. Yeah. Like, you have nothing to lose. And if somebody doesn't, if you're so afraid of being seen with the Rosary, then get one of the rings, and do this. And you can also put your hand in your pocket or something. And you can even use your hands. You have 10 hands, 10 fingers, And so he just, the Marian devotion was just such a central part of when I lived there, that he prayed the Rosary every month on the radio, and we were there, and it just became a part of an integral part of my faith.
And the fact that you were, I think I need to really emphasize it for people that are watching, how incredible it must have been to not only have been the guard for the successor of St. Peter, because we're talking about the Pope, very, very important figure, but the particular person we're talking about is Pope St. John Paul II. Some people call him St. John Paul the Great. And it really, I can tell it had an incredibly profound effect in your life, which then in turn, I imagine, opened up many other doors in life.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this one question. I don't know if you've ever been asked this before. I know the great John Paul II had an incredible influence in your life. Was there any other saint maybe that perhaps had, that you, once you became really devout, you began to love your Catholic faith? Was there any other saint you could say, you know what, I really connected with this kind of saint and really brought me even closer and closer to the faith and closer to Christ?
Can you
There
hear
you
me?
go. I hear you there. Froze up a little bit. I hear you great now.
Yeah, froze a little bit. There are many saints, you know, and the saints are of course to be our inspiration and to become saints ourselves and to find ways in our life to become, to reflect Christ. Yes, there are both saints that showed up when JP2 was there. I was very blessed to meet Mother Teresa at some point,
Wow.
which of course a hugely inspiring person. I was there also when they started the soup kitchen there in the Vatican, and I would volunteer there once in a while. It's just very impressive. But a saint that has two saints that have played a huge role in my life is one is Saint Augustine, and I think he's a beautiful saint for young people because it shows that I like to say, and actually one of the Augustinians told me, look, if Augustine can become a saint, so can you. Like everything is on the table. If you see the mercy and the goodness of God, and if he can convert, then you can convert. And there's, just a beautiful saint and very inspiring. The Confession of Augustine, they sort of end up speaking. He verbalizes what you have in your own soul and the guilt you have yourself, and he verbalizes this, and then makes a prayer out of it, and he hands this over to God. It's just. It's actually the first book I read in English is the Confessions of Augustine. I didn't grow up speaking English. I only started speaking English when I came to America.
Wow.
And that was the first book I read because I am very close to the Augustinian order, and so Augustine is one of them. The other one is actually a Swiss saint, or at least I'll claim him for the Swiss. Is Saint Francis de Sales. Wow. And I think that for a lay person, Saint Francis de Sales is a perfect guide, with his letters and with his guidance for everyday holiness, the call to holiness for the laity. I think he is the spark that led all the way to Vatican II, and that became the fire at Vatican II. To call for universal holiness and say we need to have a stronger spirituality for the lay faithful and so on. I think that goes back to a good extent to St. Francis de Sales, and his Introduction to Devout Life has been a pivotal book in my life.
You bring up two incredible figures there, and when I think of the great St. Augustine, I think of a figure that, you're right, was a work in progress, as you know, but his Holy Mother Monica never gave up on him. I never gave up on him. It took a little bit of time for his father, and when I say father, I mean spiritual father Ambrose, to break those walls down. But then here's the incredible thing, Andreas, is that St. Augustine, who is so reluctant to embrace the faith for a lot of his life, when he does embrace it, becomes one of the greatest fathers and doctors of the church ever. I mean, even today, his Trinitarian theology, his Christology is utilized when there are courses given at the Catholic University of America, I think of. And even textual critics look to his work today. It's so relevant So you're thinking of an incredible, I mean, if I can think of an incredible titan of a father, Augustine comes to mind immediately. What a magnificent figure. So that you really did have an incredible church father there. And by the way, your English is impeccable. So that's, I would have never guessed that you didn't know English before.
Yeah, actually, so eventually I was in the Guards for these about 2 years or so, and I first, of course, had my strong like conversion, and then and I remember how I would say, well, if God exists, I'm going to become a priest, right? And I so I would bring this up, and there's a person very close to John Paul II was at the time Monsignor Harvey, who is now Cardinal Harvey, and he would say to me, look, now that you have found God, found Jesus, why don't you just hang out with him a little bit before you start to tell him what to do? So I was like, why don't you just bask, like sit at his feet and just bask in the sunlight a bit, and then see what comes, rather than starting to say, okay, now that I know you, here's what I need you to do. And I had a hard time with this, but I started to do this, and actually discerned. I met a young woman from America, Michelle, who's now my wife, and I was so prayerful at that time that when I met her, when I saw her, I knew that was my wife. I just, I'm usually much thicker than that, and God has a hard time speaking to me. But at that time, I knew right away. The problem was I didn't speak English, and but she's also Hispanic, so she speaks Spanish, and then she studied French, and then she was there, as an exchange student, and so started to speak Italian. So we spoke Italian and French together, because I did speak French because I'm Swiss, and it was an interesting courtship in that sense, because there's the cultural differences, language differences, and everything, but we really felt called, and I ended up moving to the United States. And I remember when I left, John Paul, in our last meeting, sort of made, I mean, on the one hand, he's like, you're leaving? You just got here. What happened? And he's like, am I not treating you well? Like, is something wrong? And I'm like, no, Holy Father, I'm not getting any younger. It's like, I'm like 22 or 23 years old. And he's like, oh, look at him. He's not getting any younger. But then he became serious. And he said, look, you found Jesus Christ here. Now I want you to go out and bring Jesus Christ wherever you go. Like, do what you have received here, hand it on, right? This is like the commission of Paul. Like, I am not making this up. This is what I received. Now you go, you receive from me. Now you go and give others. And that was sort of the commissioning in how he sent me out. And that's how I came to the United States without anything really. I mean, with my experience and background and everything, but very much just trying to come here. And the only way to get into America was to go to school. And so I came to school and found some other students up in Boston. They were at MIT, I wasn't, who started a company that was interesting. And at the time, I had never used a computer. It was in 1989. And they actually brought the internet to the PC, which I didn't know anything about that.
Wow.
And they said, hey, you speak these languages and everything. Why don't you join us? No money in play, because this is a startup, and they're like, well, we'll give you a piece of the company, a little piece, but and I did, and as they say, the rest is history. It was called FTP Software. It became a huge success.
Yeah.
And that's when you sort of struggle to keep focus. It was much easier to remain focused on Christ and my faith when I was in the Guards than once you go out into the world and you start to have a schedule and work and all that. And my book that I eventually wrote, like 15 years later, deals with this, The Pope and the Seal.
Yeah.
deals with this, that what we need is like, this is why I started to read Francis, the sales and so on. What we need is a spirituality of work. What we need
Yep.
is a gospel of work. We need to find ways to pray through our work. Otherwise, we start to live in a silo, and the temptations in that silo of work are very strong. And we need to integrate that into our overall faith life. And that's in a way, that's most of what I focus on now, even in my teaching of young entrepreneurs.
And what would be in your opinion, if maybe not the best, some of the best advice or sound advice, if you will, to keep people on that path? Let's say they say, well, Andreas, I've got 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 or 9 to 7, whatever kind of job, and I get home tired. How can I keep my mind focused on Christ? What kind of advice would you give people like that?
The greatest thing that John Paul has taught me about work is that we are the only animal that can work. No other animals work. And our work, think about this, our work is to make something out of nothing. Like you, William, and I are creating this video right now, this talk, right? And there was nothing there before. And when we're done, this is going to live on the internet, and it's a little bit separate from us, but we created it, right? Your creativity, my creativity, we put this together. Everybody watching this, we put this together, and then we sort of ship it out, and it's off it goes, and it's independent of us, but it has it reflects us a bit.
Yeah.
That is exactly analogous to what happens in Genesis when God created the world. Except we were the crowning of this. When God says, there's nobody like me here. We need to create somebody like me. And like me didn't mean that God looks like this. What it means is that we can become creators through our work because we were made in the image and likeness of the Creator, of the Creator. So when we work, we actually imitate God. This is the breakthrough. This is the breakthrough moment and the breakthrough recognition we need to see. That when I start to, even when I clean the dishes, even if I go into my yard on a Saturday and clean up or fell a tree or do something, or I go to work and I produce a product, like we produce a software or something like that, I am imitating God, and I am continuing God's creation. Only we can do this. The other animals and the other beings on earth can't do this, only us. That means it's a godly part of us. He loved to say, we need to understand that when we work, we don't just make more, we become more. Yeah. The key here is work as a path to holiness. Right now, especially when you're burnt out after your work, you need to look back into yourself and say, I'm doing something wrong. Work should not burn you out, because the path itself is what matters. Am I aware that I'm in a deep union with God when we're doing this? You couldn't create if God wouldn't let you. You're participating in God's creativity in a way. Can you imagine how God channels his creativity through you when we're doing this? Isn't that beautiful? If you do this, it becomes prayer. But you have to have the right mindset. It's like attending at Mass. You have to have the mindset for it. I'm not saying that work is anything like the Mass or work is anything like marriage, but I'm saying work is a shadow of that. And it's the way that God calls us to steward the world and to create the benefit for both our being human, our being fully human, and then our physical well-being. So that work needs to be profitable. Yeah. This is not work therapy where everybody just gets to twiddle their thumbs and do something that has no end. But work as a path itself, we need to make it count. That's why I have so much trouble with these ideas of saying, well, in a business, you have to give back, which usually means you have to do something after the work. Don't separate work and goodness. Make sure the work is good to begin with.
Correct.
We separate this, we start to create silos. And when you create silos, and that would all open the possibility that work can do something bad. You can't let that happen. So my question is, when we work, so if you're burnt out, and just as I'm going to go very macro and then we can go micro. Very macro, understand that your work is a prayer. So when I sit down at this desk and I start to write a book, or I start to write something for the students, or I create a course, or I, if you create a product, be aware of the presence of God, to say, Lord, come and inspire my work. Also, try to actually imitate God. God doesn't create anything bad or evil. We are called to create goods that are truly good. We are called to provide services that truly serve. It's a continuum, of course.
Yeah.
If you already create, how can you make your goods even gooder? Good, more good. How can your services serve more truly?
Yeah.
And you see, that's the call to us, to our conscience, to our well-formed conscience, where we have all this opportunity to do what JP2 did with me, to bring Christ to the world. Are you bringing Christ to the world through your work, through your products? That's what he taught me. And everything I do ultimately has to do with that because that's what I discovered and gives me joy in my work. And I want to share that.
Now, by the way, incredible advice there, Andreas. I wondered, was that, or what was it that really drove you to say, you know what, I want to put this information in book form. I've got to put it out there. By the way, for people wondering, in a little bit later on, we'll talk about the other book, Andreas, that's coming out, which, by the way, I'm going to brag. I was able to take a look at it. It's fantastic. We'll talk about that later. What really inspired you to write The Pope and the CEO? Was it the incredible advice given to you, the fact that you wanted to share this with the world? Was there one thing, or really, or a whole bunch of things that made you want to put that into book form?
You're the first person to ask me this. Thank you very much. And the book has been out for 10 years. So
great book.
But praise God you asked me this, because it was two things. On the one hand, I lived this incredible career in the high-tech world, and it was the whole boom and everything. And the last, not the last company, but the last big company that I was a part of was sold to people who were fraudulent. It was a $600 million sale. And I owned a piece of that, a small piece, but a piece, for me, very significant. And we sold it to somebody who was lying. And the whole thing blew up and it went to zero. Suddenly, I'm like, is work, are we all destined to do evil here? Is this free market? Is this capitalism? Is this American dream that I'm living? Is this bad? Is this inevitable leading to this? I went through an entire search I started to study. So I went back, I had, of course, then that's when you sort of move back when you have an experience like this, you go back on your knees to pray, which is, we should never leave that position in the first place. So then you're starting to listen to God again, right? Otherwise, it's like what Cardinal Harvey says is, why don't you just listen to Jesus a little bit rather than starting to tell him what to do? Because we have this tendency, we don't listen, we tell him what to do. I started to listen more and started to research and really form myself in saying, both how does the economy really work and what does the church have to say about it? And I brought these two things together. I started to study theology, although my spiritual director said that he wouldn't let me study theology. What he wanted me to study is ministry, because he says you need to go back out into business afterwards. And we have enough theologians. Like we don't need one more what you need to do is to go back out and go evangelize. So you need to go go into ministry. So I started to study that and put the two things together. And actually, the book reflects my findings, how I believe that this free market economy with laws and all of that stuff, I can explain, but that in a sense, the free market economy that we have does correspond to the best way of humanity to flourish and create prosperity on all levels. But it requires that people have a moral understanding and a conscience. It's like democracy. Democracy is, of course, a beautiful system, and it allows for human freedom and flourishing and equality. But if we lose our morality and our moral compass inside, we can start to vote for things that are evil. Like even, in a country where there's a genocide, usually more than 50% would actually vote to kill the other side. And that's, then you can say, well, it's democracy. No, is that democracy's fault? No, it's not democracy's fault. It's that we need personal responsibility and personal holiness, really. And so that was part of, I kept wanting to say that, but I didn't know how. And then John Paul died. And I had the way it's a long story, but the way I ended up, I went through a difficult period at the time anyway, both with this loss at that company, and then we lost a baby at the time, and it was just a really horrible time. Yeah. And I had to travel. The company I led was in trouble, and I had to travel, and I just had to arrange everything in this one time frame. I could travel, I'd fly out, and I was flying somewhere else, but through London and then on. And when I landed in London, I saw the CNN was all on everywhere, and John Paul II had died. It was a Saturday evening, April 2nd, and I come out of the plane at 8:00 in the evening in London time, and I see how the Vatican is on it. So I actually land in Europe the moment he dies, which if I would have been in the US, I couldn't say, well, he's died, I need to go. But I ended up going, it was all prepared. I landed there the day he dies, the hour he dies. I was supposed to go on, but I canceled that trip. I changed my trip and I went to Rome, and I was there with less than 24 hours after he died. And this is sort of this incredible privilege that I can walk in there and say, I'd like to see him. And I get invited to go upstairs, and he was still, and I get this privilege to go and be in front of him with not a lot of people there. And there's a million people, the whole world is waiting. And by the way, William, I'm from a village of 400 people. I'm completely insignificant. And remember, I couldn't figure out what's up or down in my life. And I see like the man of the century. Like I just walk in and I get to see him. I'm in front of him. And he makes me cry all the time.
Yeah.
Remember, I met him and I cried.
Yeah.
I say goodbye to him. I'm like bawling. And guys, I'm not a crybaby, okay?
No. At your height and at your stature, we know you're not.
Yeah. So I'm there. There's a sort of a Pierre Dieu, like a bench thing. And I'm kneeling there and I'm crying. And I hear this thought in me. I kept saying, why do I get this privilege? And so on. And I get this answer of, you're welcome. And I'm saying, when you get a gift, you should say, thank you, not why, right? And so then I go over to praise. And I say, thank you. And I realized there that most people who worked with me before had no idea about my faith life and about my conviction and about my Catholicism. Now, I didn't cheat or lie and things like this, but I was not witnessing. Most people that I worked with had never heard of the fact that I was, that he played such a crucial role in my life. And I felt kneeling there that he said, you haven't finished my task yet. Like, wow. you haven't actually done what I asked you to do. And I promised him there to say, look, nobody who will meet me from now on will not hear this. And I will do this, and I'll write a book with not a lot of confidence. I'll write a book and so on. And and then other things happened right there, like personal miracles to me with that through, that where he just was very close. But anyway, I go back and I forget about it, and I go back because then I had trouble with the company, and a year later, a friend of mine said, look, you haven't been to a retreat and you're coming with me. And I go to this retreat. He was going to drive me, and I'm like, no, I'll be there myself. And of course, I'm like 3 hours late. And I get there, I get into the chapel, and the priest says, and of course, today is the anniversary of John Paul's death. And I'm like, okay, I get it. That's the day I started to write the book on that retreat. But then I still wanted to get out by saying, look, who wants to read what I have to say about this? So I approached George Weigel, who's a friend of a friend, because I know him, and said, look, George, and I knew that George is somebody who says it as it is. He doesn't mince words.
Yep.
And he's not just going to say it's yes, just to please you, right? He's actually objective. And so I went to him and I said, look, and here's some ideas of what I'm doing. And, you already wrote everything. And he turned and he says, what you do and what I do are two different things. You're giving a witness, and every generation needs a witness. And so, yes, you should write it. I was literally hoping he was going to say, no, you keep doing what you're doing. And he says, no, you should, because, and that's, by the way, why he wrote the foreword, because I put him on the hook and I said, oh, I'll do it if you write the foreword. And he says, I will. And so that's how this happened.
And an incredible book, by the way. People, if you're wondering, you can find that book on Amazon. And shortly after we're done, I will provide a link down there for people that may not be watching live right now. You tune in later. There will be a link down there. You can check that out. I'm glad that you wrote that book. I really am glad that you did. So that is why he wrote the foreword. And now we have a little bit of a background as to why he was the one that wrote the foreword. Let me ask you this. If somebody were to ask you, okay, what is the best advice Pope St. John Paul II gave you? You could say, you know what? My faith was inspired, was put on fire for the faith. The lessons I learned from him stayed with me throughout the tenure of my life. It still stayed with me now. But if there's one piece of advice that you learned from Pope St. John Paul II that you would want to give to people, younger, older, whatever age, what would that piece of advice be?
Good question. There's so many things that I like that he influenced, and of course this is also not all verbal always, because I also see what he does, right? You're as a Swiss Guard, you're sort of the proverbial fly on the wall. You're always there, so you see what he does, and you hear, of course, what he says to people, even though he's not talking to you, but you're there. I mean, you're there, and so a couple of things. It's his approach to God, his approach to Christ. Something I often ask, I do a lot of coaching of entrepreneurs and people who lead companies, and of course also my students. And I often say, what he did, John Paul would have this, the yellow legal pad thing, and he would actually put a little desk into his chapel, and he would start every project in front of the tabernacle. And basically sit there and say, look, I'm going to try to do this. How many of you start, next time you have to plan a project, I ask you to do this. Take a pen and paper and go to the chapel and go in front of the tabernacle as close as you can. And then sit there and don't start to write yet. Just put it down and say, I come here to do your will. Now, I have this project and everything. It would help me if you would inspire me as I sit here to do what you want me to do. And so I'm just going to try to calm down here and like have this, and, to have this natural conversation. And, Lord, I believe in you, and I believe you can guide my mind. And I invite you in, and I want to do good and create goods that are truly good, services that truly serve. My work shall glorify you. Here's my business plan. And then you start to write, and you contemplate, and you keep going back. And, in a sense, it's like what I do. It's like to make Jesus the chairman of your board, right? Who gives you, well, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? These kinds of plannings, you can do this in the beginning of the year. Now it still counts as the beginning of the year. I like to write a yearly plan to start there. Go to adoration, bring pen and paper so you know what he's saying, take notes. And that's, John Paul, every encyclical, every book, everything he wrote, he started there. It's one of the deep lessons. And it gives you this filial approach, and this uncomplicated approach to God that is beautiful.
I have never, ever heard anything like that before, but that is incredible advice. I mean, really to desire to magnify the Lord in all of your daily workings and all of your movements of the day, that is, I have to be very honest with you, Andreas, it's very challenging.
Oh yeah,
yeah, very. But you know what? Very challenging, very uplifting. But that is incredible. Let me ask you: do you still do this to this day? Do you do that?
Yes, I do that today. I'm working on my yearly plan still. I'm releasing this book. I'm running a center at the Catholic University of America, and it's difficult to know what to do. And I would like to do the things not to my glory, but to his. And it's difficult to resist and to know the difference, right? And so I'm really trying to hold myself to this. By the way, it also helps. So there's when I work with folks, I try to bring others into the game as well. So I would do the adoration part. I would also have a few faith friends who, just like what I did with George, who will tell you, they're going to tell you the truth, right? Because sometimes God needs a human person to speak a little stronger because of some of our blind spots and our self-talk is very hard to overcome. I think for the Lord because we crowded out, but then we can have also a spiritual director. But for me, often it is a couple of friends who know my business in a sense, who know my situation and the kind of things in my industry and environment and so on, so that they're not talking about something they don't really understand. And then to run that, the next level is to run that by them. And that's something I'm trying to do with this, to say you need to strike a balance. And particularly what I mean here is that this gets more and more difficult because we have this beautiful both and in Catholicism. And I'm mostly talking about the spirituality in business, okay? And you see, you have that spirituality in business still allows business to be business, but you elevate it, which means, for example, so I'm talking about how products, goods are supposed to be truly good and services are supposed to truly serve, but I'll give you two more conditions. They also have to be created through the power of a team. So I need you to make your team, not just you, but your team, your competitive advantage. So you can't just be a lone wolf walking around and doing your thing. And the second thing, this has to be profitable.
Yeah.
And this is the part that sometimes we Christians fall off with this and say, nah, or we say profit is an evil or bad thing. No, it isn't. Look at God's creation. God, the worker. The first thing we know about God is that God creates, is a creator, is working. Yeah. God has never created a thing without it being profitable. There's not a tree that doesn't produce more. Actually, it's actually the sign of love is that it produces more.
Yep.
The distinction and the both and, we need to be both good and profitable. The balance, which is the human genius and the faith comes into this, to know the proper balance, to say, so my question for you as a producer, as a manager, as a head of family or the breadwinner or anything like that, is how much is enough? So we often have these dichotomies that we go into. Is it this or that? As Catholics, we usually say it's both. Is it labor or capital? It's both.
Yeah.
So all of these fights, which actually goes back to like the theories of René Descartes and then Karl Marx, Jean Paul would say, they are the dualist. It's saying this or that, either or. You know, it's like men or women, or capital or labor. And this all is a conflict. It's both and. And the goal here is unity and complementarity. Not even it's equality in the access, in the opportunity, but inequality in the outcome and who we are. You and I were not the same. We're equal, but we're different. And what we're doing by this either or is we're starting to lose that the creativity and the diversity that God creates into nature. Sorry, this is a bit of
that's a fantastic point. A number of really good points there. And that does bring me to my next question. You've got a new book coming out very soon.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? Which, by the way, there's one particular portion of the book that really, really stuck out to me. I'm going to read it for the audience to get a little bit of a snippet. You write, as Pope John Paul II liked to point out to those of us who worked for him, it's all about love. In English, there's only one word for love. So it sounds odd to love your customers, coworkers, and investors. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit? Let's talk about the book. When will that book be out? And can you talk about that little portion a little bit? Because, by the way, I found the book to be incredible. Very, very good job on that. I can't wait for that hard edition to come out.
Yeah, thank you. It will come out in April. And that section there that you're writing, that you just read, this book is, of course, for a general audience. So this is not a book for specifically Catholics or so, but it's generally for people and what I call principled entrepreneurship, people who look for meaning in work and want to strike that balance and create great companies and great products. And I give some advice on 5 pillars that this is on. My teaching usually has a lot to do with mental models. So I'm saying it's how you think about something. It's in a way like, very Augustinian. It's like you have to take a step back and say, what are we trying to do here? Because the way you set this up and the way you think about it is going to produce the result, right? And so a lot of times I'm de-emphasizing the nitty-gritty, which I call actually the paint by numbers. So many people in business school, they learn, oh, here's the strategy you need to do, and this is how this works, or rank everybody, fire the bottom 10%. This is all simplistic paint by numbers, which nobody should ever do just on a blanket scale, like say, this is the one thing. Business is for people, not people for business. That's the first thing to recognize. And because we need to put the person at the center of business, that means that business is as diverse and manifold as there are people involved. And then you're supposed to create a team out of these people at business, which becomes the real job of a business leader is to do that, is to bring people together and create teams that then create these products and so on.
Let me interrupt real briefly, only because I notice here in Zoom and on YouTube, people are very mad at me because I forgot to tell them the name of the book. Let me tell them right away. The name of the book will be The Art of Principled Entrepreneurship. There you go. I'm sorry for interrupting there. I should have said it from the beginning.
Yeah. So The Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, and it is exactly that. You see, business is more of an art than a science. It's dehumanizing to do business as a science. It's also limiting and not very effective. Do you know that we have over 60% of our workforce can't wait to go home in the evening? They're totally disengaged.
Yep.
There are something like 16% of our workforce is actively disengaged. They're trying to hurt the company they're working for. Many leaders would say, oh, what horrible people. It is not them. It is you. You're leading in such a bad way that you're making people so cynical that they don't believe a word you're saying. They're totally being used. They feel totally used. they feel taken advantage to, and you make it all talk about the values and everything of this company. But then when you really act, they're being used and replaced and this and that, and they're not a team. They don't count as an individual and so on, which then causes them to check out. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to prevent, this disassociation from you personally and your work. You basically become a robot, right? And you just turn me off. I want to get out of here. And there's no emotional and even spiritual connection to the work they do. This new generation that's coming, that I'm teaching now, they are yearning for this connection, the meaning at work. And that's part of what I'm trying to explain and give a bit of a mind map of how to get back to this. And here's a part, I want to go back to this love part, because the 60s are over, so it's not like that's not what I'm talking about. John Paul, I heard him say once, in many languages like English, love is sort of a weird word, because you love pretzels, you love your wife, you love the dog. It becomes sort of nondescript. Italian is a beautiful language. I love Italian. If for me to you now, William, is to say, I wouldn't say I love you, ti amo. That's more for the personal, familial love or marriage love kind of thing. But still, how do I express how I love you? Is they would say ti voglio bene. It's not ti amo. To William and I would say to each other, ti voglio bene. And this is what I want to say to all of you. Ti voglio bene means I want your good. I want your good. Well, what good do I want for you? And that's the question, is in a way, I'm just asking anybody, and I ask my students to say, if you have goodwill, we have that too, that word. If we have goodwill for our customers, for our investors, for our workforce, or for our team, how does it manifest itself? And what's the good that we wish on them? As Catholics, and this is sort of where I'm helping to guide people to say, well, I have to check my faith at the door if I'm working in a secular company. No, you don't. It's just that you don't. Don't go in there and tell everybody what to do in a Catholic way. Okay, but that doesn't. Your morality is still your morality, and you want to bring that with you as an asset into the marketplace. And what that means is, what matters here is what you wish for these people, and what I wish for you. Anybody watching this, I wish for you eternal happiness. I want you to become as happy as you can be, not pleasure happy. That would be fleeting. I mean, happy as in becoming the best version of yourself, and forever be happy. In the Catholic language, we call that kind of best version of yourself, we call that holy, meaning fully human, taking advantage of all my talents, non-talents, all my opportunities, my position in this universe, which is an unrepeatable event. So for me to become the best at that I can be, then that's my condition then to get into heaven. If you're not holy, you're not going to get into heaven. And so by reaching that, that's what I wish for everybody. And then of course I wish them forever happiness in heaven. If that's how I feel about you, why would I sell a product to you that would interfere with this? Why would I create a service that leads people astray from that realization of their full potential? If I love my employees like this, why would I make you work in a way that endangers that path? Why would I work with you without looking at you individually to say, how can you flourish? And this is one of the core questions of what I'm asking in this book. But I'm doing this from a perspective that is actually, you could call that humanistic, because this is something that I have never met a person who's not interested in this. And so that's why this book, The Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, has a much broader picture than The Pope and the CEO.
Incredible. A lot of incredible information there, Andreas. And I want to get to a few people's questions so I can, by the way, this has been magnificent. Anytime you want to add anything else, please feel free to. I've really been edified and blessed by your presence today. I want to tell you, thank you so much for your time. Now, Rosa wants to ask, she says, what one lesson did St. John Paul II inspire for you to align his teachings to your entrepreneurship lessons?
What's her name?
Rosa.
Rosa, hi. Thanks for asking. I think I understand your question the right way by saying what part of this, what's the bridge to entrepreneurship from JP2?
Yeah.
And well, it's the theology of the body. So much of what so if you go through the Pope and the CEO, you will see it more clearly that what I'm really doing is I'm applying the theology of the body to business. And if you go through the Art of Principled Entrepreneurship, you will see it a little fainter, but you see the underlying idea, again, that the person counts, every person counts, and that business, that we are corporeal, right? The persons count individually. And that we then as a team can actually then again count, we count as more than one in a way, because, Christ would have died for one of us. And at the same time, there's this both and again, that when we come together as a team, so now William and I doing this podcast together, we can actually, hopefully one of him and one of me actually produces more than the sum of our parts, right? That this becomes three good. You know what I mean? and this is the beauty of business. Again, this has to do with profitability, right? And profitability is not only financial, but also financial. And so that's the same with the theology of the body, where John Paul, of course, talks about marriage and the objective of which, by the way, is profitability in a sense, the human profitability of procreation and children. And that's sort of where I'm getting some of the core ideas of where I'm coming from.
Great reply there. By the way, Gloria Bautista would like to know, did your parents ever get to meet Pope St. Paul, John Paul II?
Good question, Gloria. Good question. They did. And then I didn't cry, but my mom did. So when I did my swearing in, to this day, the Pope invites all the parents of the Swiss Guards who are swearing in, which is basically the day. It's a beautiful ceremony. You're all dressed up in the suit and armor, and you're promising to give your life to protect the Pope. And then that day or the day after, the Pope isn't at that ceremony, but the day of or after, the Pope invites all the guards and the parents and basically thanks the parents for your service. And so we did that, and my mom and dad were next to me, and I have like pictures of it, and it gives me goosebumps just to think about it. And of course my mom cried, and he told her how much he liked me and that I was his tallest guard. And of course he knew all the, he knew my story. And so when my mom realized that he actually, said, oh, here's Andrea. So these are your parents. And, and telling my mom like how much, that's another thing I'm taking from him, how much he enjoys working with me, and knowing some things moved her to tears. I'm so careful now that when I try to run, when I ran companies or so, or even now sometimes with students or so, where you're working with somebody, pay attention to people to the point that when you meet their important people in life, they're even their kids or their parents or their wife or husband, that you can say something positive, uplifting about this person, to say why you're so happy to work with them. Because what he told about me was specific to me. It means you have to pay attention to the individual. And so often today we meet people, co-workers, spouses or parents or whatever, or with the students, and we just say, oh, nice to meet you. But we could use that time to lift this person up and actually give them goodness.
Incredible reply there. Now, we have one that I think is a great one. Lucy would like to know. She says, I find many things that Andreas has said very interesting. One thing he said that I've never heard anyone talk about before is that profit is not bad. Being Catholic and profitable is not mutually exclusive. My question is this: do you agree that being profitable is not only not bad, but it is necessary, especially when we are in a place which is actively anti-God, because having money enables us to distribute the money where it is needed, to do the work we wish to do to glorify God.
Yes. Oh, you're giving me this is worth a whole other show. I believe that profit is absolutely required in business. There's only one reason for a non-profit company, which I think is an oxymoron, and that's charity, when you actually give the money away. Otherwise, allocating resources without producing more is against the law of nature. Yeah. Why would you allocate resources and not have more afterwards? I mean, it's wasteful. The only excuse for that is to give it away to somebody who needs, like give food away, give shelter, give charity. And there's often a misunderstanding. I have a whole talk about this also, about fighting poverty. I've done a lot of work in poverty alleviation. I was involved in a movie, and you might, if you're interested in that, let me just give a plug for that. It's called Poverty Inc. I had a foundation before I started to teach, and together with the Acton Institute, I helped create this movie. I mean, I didn't create it. I'm in it a little bit, but I sort of funded a piece of that, the seed funding of it. It's called Poverty Inc. And it's you can find it on Netflix and so on, which talks about how what we need to do is to companies either are humanitarian, and humanitarian companies should focus on a crisis that is time limited, and they should go in and give that stuff away and leave. Or economic development. If you're in economic development, there's only one way to solve poverty, and that's to create profit, which is create jobs that are profitable, which means that the jobs are, high and rising wages. There's no other way to create this. You have to create jobs. But jobs are never going to be created with charity. They're only going to be created with business. And so our whole way of fighting poverty, both here in the US and abroad, is completely backwards. And it's a pity that many of the Christian efforts are completely wrong-headed, where they're treating economic issues as if it was a humanitarian crisis, which it isn't. And if you give the wrong medicine for the wrong kind of illness, you know that there's going to be trouble. And we're seeing this in Haiti, we're seeing this in Africa, we're seeing it in a lot of areas in the Southern Hemisphere. And this is another part that I'm very strongly involved with, to teach the actual enterprise solutions to poverty. We don't need to just have a heart for the poor. We need a mind for the poor.
Great reply. By the way, this will be the final one we'll take. Albert would like to know, at your time at the Vatican, did you ever encounter Cardinal Ratzinger?
Good question, Albert. I'm glad you asked. Actually, I did see him, and he gave me this. Look at this.
Wow.
Just for you. So I had all kinds of interactions with him because he was, of course, with John Paul all the time, and because he was the German cardinal, he was very close to the Swiss Guards. He still is to this day. And so I, of course, knew him, and we would talk whenever he went to the Pope and he would wait, we would talk with each other. And I always had a lot of questions for him, and so I won't go into details there. But then when I left, I, of course, also approached him. And then at the end, he gave me this, which is called The Introduction into Christianity. And you see, he gave me this insignia.
Wow.
That's his Benedict's like small little scribbles that he has. And so that was.
I am incredibly jealous. That's incredible.
Yeah. And I just had it here because I'm like, I should really preserve this better than just having it in my office at the university. So that's why I just brought it here. So great.
Well, I was going to say, great book. Everything Pope Benedict has written is great. Even Pope St. John Paul II. Incredible. I've been incredibly edified by your presence today, Andreas. Just really incredible. And I'd love to have you back on later once that other book comes out. I'd love to have you back on. But before we end today, I'd like to give you the floor. Anything you want to talk about, any plug you want to put, If you want to plug a web page, you want to plug
No, actually,
anything.
no, I don't want to. So look, what I want to plug is this. So the Catholic University of America is doing some really good stuff, especially in the field. I mean, in all, we have 13 schools. My part of it is business school. And we have something called the Bush School of Business. And within, I have this center, the Sioka Center. And we do really good stuff where you, just like what we talked about, where we teach you how to be a Catholic in business well. So if you know any students who want to go to school and want to come to Catholic and to the business school, we have a whole office that takes care of this. If you want to come visit and all that, that's great. We also have a program that focuses on high schools, because I find that this mental attitude to see business for what it is, the co-creativity with God, or participating in God's creativity is really the way to say it, is something that earlier you learn it, the better. And so we developed a program that can be used by homeschoolers. We homeschool, by homeschoolers, but also Catholic high schools, because this program is particularly Catholic, because then you can go like the full way and just explain the richness of it all. And we make this available for free. And wow. We train you as a teacher if you want to do this, both as a homeschool teacher or as a teacher at a high school. And we give the students, they pay a couple $100. I'm not sure exactly how much, but they pay for the credit hours because it's a university. But then you get 3 credits at CUA if you at Catholic if you come here. But that's, I don't primarily say it to plug the Catholic University or have you come here, even though I'd like that. I'm saying it because we need to spread this gospel of work. Yep. We need to make people understand that business is a force for good, and it's all in how you do this, that this approach to business and approach to life, that we see everything through prayer, that we don't separate our spirituality and our faith out from our daily life, is so needed and important. And the earlier somebody gets this in life, the better. That's why I'm involved in education.
And you do an incredible job. And I can tell you that I'm really thrilled for that book to come out. And when it does, God willing, hopefully you'll have enough time. I'd love to have you on again in the future. It's been incredibly edifying. Thank you so much. And I'll be praying for you, be asking for the incredible intercession of St. John Paul II to pray for you, pray for your family. Thank you so much for your time today, Andreas.